Logout from Spring Boot application that uses JWT based authentication is different and tricky than the logout from traditional session based authentication system, and that's what we are going to learn in this tutorial. Hi, I am Iftekhar Hussain, your instructor for this video. Here, what we are going to learn? We will learn some basics on how session based authentication works, and also learn how JWT authentication works and why we need to take different approach to logout for this. And we will learn what concept we can take from session based authentication to implement our JWT logout. I will try to break the whole thing into smaller digestible parts so that you can understand it. I hope it will be helpful for you. But before proceeding to the tutorial, I highly recommend to watch my previous tutorial where I have shown how to authenticate using JWT in Spring Boot application. If you have already watched it, let's start.
Let me give you a summary of how session-based authentication works in a typical application. Suppose there is a browser from where your user will send a request, and this is our server. Let's make it bigger, place it a suitable place. Let's make it simple. This is our browser and mark it, this is our server. Suppose any user sending a login request to the server. When server receives a login request, it authenticates the user, then it creates a session for the user and store the session in the session storage. I'll draw this shortly, and it responds the user a reference to the session. So here is our session storage. Let's add a database. Our session storage is this, stores the session, and now here is our response with session reference. So after receiving the response with session reference, the browser stores the session reference in this cookie. So when doing further request to the server, it includes this session reference to its cookie and send the request. So after receiving the request, server look up for the session from the session storage. If it finds the session, it does the necessary steps and responds to the browser. This is how this session works for the simplest form. Now let's take a look on how this authentication works in a REST API. Add a front-end client, make it a little bit bigger. This is our client. This may be our device or browser or any other piece of software that communicate with the REST API. Here is our server. From client, it sends a login request to the server. After receiving the login request, the server validate the user, then generate the token, sign the token with the secret key, and return a response to the client with the token in the body. So let's draw this response, send response with token. So for any subsequent request where the client want to access the protected resource, it request with the token in the header. So after receiving that request, let's add a circle here. After receiving the request, it does the token validation. So what it actually does, first of all, it check if the token is expired. Then it validates the signature and also check if the token belongs to the user. And if everything is okay, then it provides the data from these protected resources. But there is a feature of REST API is that the REST API is stateless, meaning the request does not have any idea about the previous request. Even the token is not stored in the server. So when it comes to logout of this token-based authentication system like REST API, it's little bit tricky because of the stateless nature of the REST API. Even Spring Security does not have any default logout feature implementation for such kind of system. JWT token is not meant to invalidate. Once it is created, it is valid until it expires. Remember, we have added expiry in our token that I have shown you in my previous tutorial. So for implementing logout, we will use the session-based authentication systems concept. We will introduce a cache storage to store tokens like session storage. We will add a flag to determine if the user using the token is logged out. When a user tries to log out, we will mark that token logged out and update it in the storage. Whenever the server gets a request, it lookups its cache for the token. If it finds the token is logged out, then it will return with response code 401 unauthorized. We will use our existing database for token storage, but cache storage like Redis or Memcached can be used in this purpose. Which one you use really depends on your requirement. Before we jump into the coding, let's break the whole project into smaller tasks. This will make it clearer and easier to work on. First of all, we need to store the token in the database. So, we will need a token table, hence a token entity. Suppose this is our token table. This will have an ID. Token to store the token value is logged out. This is a boolean type of field. We will use it to flag the token if the user has logged out or not. We will also need to know to which user this token belongs to. We can map this with the user table with the user ID. So we need the user ID field. Suppose this is our user table. This user may have multiple tokens which we can identify using this user ID. Then we will need a token repository for the interaction with the database. In this repository, we will need two methods for database query. One is for getting all the tokens created by user and another find the token by its token value. Now, next part is to add validation rule in the service class to check if the user has logged out. Let's bring this whole thing in a block. This is for token storage and validation. Next is our logout process. When the user tries to log out, we will search for the token from the token table using its token value. Then we will mark the token as logged out and update the token in the database. And we will also do some necessary configuration in the security config file. That's all we are going to do. So now it's time to jump to the coding. We will continue building on the concept covered in our previous tutorial. If you have not watched it yet, you can find the link in the description below. Additionally, the full source code for this project is available on my GitHub repository, linked in the description. As I have shown you, we will need a token entity. Inside the model package, create a new Java class, token, make it entity, give it a table name, token. This token will have some properties. We need a ID. This is primary key of our token table. For this, we need to add ID annotation. The value of this ID will rely on MySQL's auto increment feature. For that, we need to specify the generation type using generate value, and generation strategy is identity. Next, give this field a column name of ID. Next, we will need token for storing token value. Give this a column name. Then we need to identify if the user that using this token is logged out. Give it a column name is logged out. Then we need the relation of the token with the user. It will be many to one relationship. We will identify it using user ID. So join column name is user ID. Now generate setter and getter for all of these fields. Now let's add mapping with the token in user. Head to the user class. Whenever a token is generated, we will store the token in the database. So a single user will have multiple tokens. So we need a list of tokens. It will have one-to-many relationship. It will be mapped by user. This name is the same as the field name we have provided for user in our token table. We'll also need to generate getter and setter for this field. It's time to create repository for token. Inside repository package, create a new Java class. Make sure interface is selected. Add name token repository. It extends JP repository for token and primary key is integer. As I have mentioned previously, it will have two custom methods. One is find all token by user. It accepts user ID. We will also need custom query for this. Select T, that is for token, from token table. We need to join with user on tokens user ID equals users ID, where tokens user ID is equal to the user ID that we are passing to this method, and it's not logged out, that is logout equals false. Another method is find by token. It accepts token. Our repository is complete. Now we need to save generated token. Open authentication service. We are generating the token in register and authenticate method. Here in the register method, we are generating the token. After this, we need to save this. For that, we need to inject token repository. Create a final field for token repository. We need to add this in the constructor. Let's remove existing constructor and generate a new one. I am moving this to new line so that you can read it better. Scroll down. Here we are going to save the token. Create a new instance of token. We need to name it token1 because token is already taken. Let's rename this variable. Right click, refactor, rename code occurrences. Rename it to JWT. Then set token value. Need to set logged out. The user is just authenticated, so the logged out is false, and set the user. Here is our user created. Set this to our tokens user. Finally, save it. We need to do the same in our authenticate method. I am going to move this line of code into a new method so that I don't have to write the same code again and again. IntelliJ IDE have a nice feature that you can extract the line of codes into a new method just a few clicks. Select the lines, right click, refactor, extract methods. Give method a name, save user token. Now in authenticate method, after the token is generated here, call our save user token method, pass this token and user. Let's move this method at the end of this class. Now let's start the project. Check our database. Here is our new token table is created. Let's check this. It has the necessary fields we have provided in our token entity. Now let's try to register a new user. Open the Postman. Here I already have the necessary information for new user registration. Just send a request. Our user is created and a token is generated. Let's check it in the database. Refresh the data. Here is our generated tokens value, and this token is mapped with user of ID 1. Let's check this user. Here this is our newly registered user. Now let's try to authenticate the newly created user. Update the username, send a request. User is authenticated successfully, so a new token is generated. Refresh the database. Here new token for the user is added. Let's send another authentication request. Refresh the data. Another token is generated and saved in our database. Now let's copy the first token and try to access a secured endpoint. In demo request, paste the token value and send request. So we can access this from here. Again do the same with the second token. Copy this token, set the token value in Postman and send request. It's also valid token, so we can access this protected resource. So at a time all three tokens are valid, but it should not be case. There should be only one valid token per user at a given time. So let's modify this thing so that other previously generated token becomes invalid. Here is a plan for how we can do this. First of all, we need to get all the tokens generated by the user from the database. Then loop through all the tokens and set logged out to true. And finally,
save all the tokens in the database. Here is the authentication manager. Inside authenticate method, just before the token is saved, I am going to query the database. We will get the list of tokens, valid tokens list by user. We need to query the database using token repository. We need to call find all token by user, pass our user ID. Then we need to check if the token list is not empty. If not, then loop through the token. I am using for each loop and lambda expression to loop through the token list and setting logged out to true. After the end of the loop, we need to save all the tokens using the token repository save all method. Pass our token list. That's it. Let's extract these lines of code into a new method so that we can use it without repeating the same code if we need to. Naming it revoke all tokens by user. Start the server. Open the Postman. Register a new user. Check the database. A new token is added. Now copy this token, head to the demo URL, paste the newly created token and send the request. Successful response. Let's try to authenticate the user. Head to the login request tab, send a request. The user is authenticated and a new token is generated. Check the database. Refresh the data. Our first token is set to logged out. Now head to the demo URL tab in the Postman. Here is the token field. I have the old token. With this token, I would like to send a request and see the response. Send request. We are getting success response, but we have invalidated the token. So, why we can access this protected resource with that invalid token? That is because though we have marked the token logged out and saved the data to database, we still did not instruct the Spring Boot to block that token for further access. Let's do it. Open JWT Authentication filter. Here we are checking if the token is valid. This method is from JWT service. Let's open that class. Here is valid method. Here we are checking if the token is belongs to that user and if expired. We need to add additional checking. If the user is logged out, after this username field, add a new boolean variable is valid token. We need to query the database. For this, we need to inject our token repository. Add final token repository field. We need to add this field in the constructor. Now it's the time to set the value of the isValid token variable. Using token repository, find by token, pass token here. Use map method to check if the token is not logged out, or else return false. And finally, in return statement, add logical AND checking with our valid token variable. We are done. Start the server. Register a new user. Registration was successful. Copy the token. Using that token, try to access protected demo URL. It is successful response. Now head to the login tab. Login the user. New token is generated. From demo URL with the old token, try to access the resource. Send request. This time the response is 401. Now try to access with the newly created token. It is successful. So we have successfully implemented the first step of the project. That is, user will not able to access the protected resource with blacklisted token. It's time to add logout functionality. Open the security config. Here in the security filter chain method, we need to add logout. Inside lambda expression, logout URL set to logout. Need to add logout handler. Pass logout handler. I will create a custom logout handler later. After successful logout, we need to clear the security context. We can do this using logout success handler. Inside lambda expression, it have three parameters: request, response, and authentication. We will clear the security context holder. Clear context. Now create our custom logout handler. Inside config package, create a new class, custom logout handler. It implements a logout handler interface. It requires to implement logout method. Move this parameter to a new line. We need to write here some code. This code is similar to what we have written in JWT Authentication filter class. Copy these codes from that class. We need to copy from the line where we are extracting the auth header up to extracting the token. Paste it in the custom logout handler's logout method. Here we do not need this filter chain. Remove it. Here is the token is extracted from the header. Here is what we are going to do. First, get the stored token from the database. Then mark the token as logged out and save it to the database. Let's scroll up. Add a new token repository field. Generate a constructor with that repository. Now get the saved token using token repositories. Find by token method. Pass token. If the token is not found, then return null. Need to check if the token is not null. If not null, then set the stored token logout to true. Save the token. Head to security config. Create a new private final field for custom logout handler. I need to add this to our constructor. So let's remove the old one. Generate a new constructor with all the field. Moving in the new line. Here showing an error for the logout handler. Open the custom logout handler. We need to annotate this class as component. With this, the error is solved. Start the server. Open Postman. Register a new user. Using the newly generated token, let's try to access the protected resource. Open the demo tab, paste the token and send a request. The response is successful. Now let's try to log out. Open the new tab, get request. URL is localhost 8080/logout. In the authorization tab, PRR token, paste the token, send request. The response code is 200. That means the logout was successful. Check the database. Our token table. The token is marked as logged out. Try to access the demo URL with that invalid token. Send request. The response code is 401. We have successfully implemented the logout functionality. And with that, we are end of this tutorial. I tried my best to break the whole thing into small steps so that you can understand it. Hopefully, it will help. I will be back with another tutorial soon. Happy coding!